read it.
So you have to-
All right.
You need a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Don. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Okay, public comment? No? Okay. Then we are gonna write to the action items, which is to consider approval of contract extension with Moss Adams for auditing services. Todd?
All right, so you just heard from Moss Adams and Julie, and you just heard how they're completing up our current audit. This actually completes their work under the original contract that we entered into them back in June of 2017. When we did that process, we did go through a process where we solicited proposals from a variety of different auditing firms, and so Moss Adams was the firm that came out on top. And this is, according to board policy, this is a decision that the board selects the auditor. We're now finding ourselves in a position where under our contract, we can extend the contract for 1 year, 2 times. And so this would be the first extension of that existing contract. But as we noted, this is a board decision, and so we're bringing that decision to you this evening. It's as simple as that. So if there's any questions, be happy to answer any questions, but what staff is recommending and asking for is that we extend the Moss Adams contract 1 more year, so it allows them to work on the audits next go round.
Money-wise?
Same, they locked in the price.
Okay.
All things being equal, we'd expect to extend it again next year?
Yeah, but that'll be a decision on the way the contract's written. I would come to you every year for that,
For the next 2 years.
for the next 2 years.
Excuse me, then is this extension for a year or
Yeah,
1 year?
this one's for a year, but we
This
can
one's for 1
extend it we have 2 chances
To
to
extend
extend it.
1 year each time?
1 year
Yeah.
each time, yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking because we budget 2 years at a time that, I'm saying we're likely to extend it a second year next year. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm gonna make a motion then. I move the board approve the 1-year contract extension with Moss Adams LLC for audit services and authorize the general manager to sign the contract extension on behalf of the Clackamas River Water Board of Commissioners.
Second motion?
Okay, we'll move and seconded. Karen?
Commissioner Andrew?
Yes.
Commissioner Danell?
Yes.
Commissioner French?
Yes.
Commissioner Garrison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kalani?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. Number 2, consider contract extension for Team Electric for on-call electrical services. Todd again.
All right, yes, a couple different contract issues this evening. This one, the reason it's coming before you this evening is because we're asking for an increase in the dollar amount of this contract, and it's beyond the general manager's authority. So this is why this decision gets to come before you this evening. However, as far as some background, back in 2018, CRW went through a process where we solicited for electrical assistance from an electrical company, and Team Electric was chosen in order to provide that routine and emergency electrical work on behalf of the district. And they're one of our, what we call our on-call contracts, so we go through a process, they set it up, and it's kind of jobs here and there. Similar to what we just talked about with the Moss Adams contract, this one too had the ability for us to extend 2 1-year extensions, two extensions 1 year at a time. And the initial 1-year extension we've already exercised, so this is the second of the 1-year extensions. And again, normally we could do that. However, this is one of the things we're asking for is additional funds for some additional work that I'll talk about in just a moment. And hence it goes before you. So while we're preparing to look at this contract for this next period, we noted that there was some additional electrical work that needed to be finished up as part of a larger electrical study that we had completed previously. And so namely the 90th Street pump station so that was a chunk of work that we wanted to include in that on-call contract. So, the first year of the contract, I think it was at 60,000, then we dropped it down to 50,000, now we're asking it to be bumped back up to 65,000. If there's any questions, again, you know, this is one of those things we only use what we need, doesn't mean that we're gonna use all of that. But obviously having the ability to call up electrician on demand, especially with emergencies, and to deal with, as you can imagine with water treatment plant and pump stations, we have a variety of electrical work that needs to take place as well. So this has been a real value to the district.
So does this sit in a bucket here and you draw on it to pay the electrical company, or do you pay them the 65 and then they
Good
reimburse you?
Yeah, no, we only pay what
It's by the
for the
job.
work that they do.
Okay,
yeah.
so that 65 is just a,
It's all the work, we need to
Bucket.
ask you for authorization to spend that money.
If we
So-
have to.
okay.
If we have to,
Right.
right.
So we can't spend the money unless you give us that authorization. And only, yeah, right, and it's an on-call contract, so we just are paying them for whatever work they actually do.
So we give you the authorization for the 65, but not the individual items?
Right,
You manage
We
that
take care of
process?
that.
Okay.
When a 2 a.m.
So we're not
call
gonna
to
see that.
call.
I was gonna say, we're gonna see that. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Do I have a motion?
Okay. I move the board approve the contract extension and increase the not-to-exceed amount to 65,000 and authorize the general manager to sign on behalf of the Clackamas River Water.
Second the motion.
Okay, motion's been moved and seconded. Karen?
Commissioner Anger?
Yes.
Commissioner Danell?
Yes.
Commissioner French?
Yes.
Commissioner Garrison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kalani?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Awesome. Item 3, consider approval of the 2020 board goals for the general manager. Todd, you're up.
All right, I'll make this one short as well. So, in your packet is the final draft of the proposed goals. This was an agenda item at our last work session. This is exact same language from the work sessions. There were no changes. We didn't have any suggestions or changes at the work session itself, and I didn't receive anything in the meantime. So we place this on the agenda to ask for your approval.
Any questions or comments? Do I have a motion?
I move the board approve the 2020 board goals for the general manager.
Second motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Karen?
Commissioner Anger?
Yes.
Excuse me. Commissioner Danell?
Yes.
Commissioner French?
Yes.
Commissioner Garrison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kalani?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Thank
Oh,
you.
we're just moving right along.
Moving right along with the consent agenda. Gross payroll and accounts paid November 2019.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second the motion.
Okay. Motion has been made and seconded.
You can do it all.
Yeah, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, then it has been moved. It passed. Now I have approved the consent agenda. Got off the hook easy on that one, Carl. Okay, informational reports. Todd?
All right, first I want to point out a few things in your folder that was in this evening. Get your monthly update, which you always obviously have every month. A couple things I do want to just note in that update is, again, we're still carrying forward the notes on page 4 that explain the issue as it relates to the water revenue being down a little bit. And so we noted that we had a decrease in water sales of about 10% this last year, which again was something that was encountered throughout the region. It's a pretty common theme. I've actually heard some higher percentages in some areas. And then also wanted to make sure that you're aware of, again, we talked about this before too, but on the personal services, on the expenses, that being high, but again, that's because of the transitional liability payment that was made right at the first of the line.
Right.
And so if you subtract out that, then we're well within where we should be for the year. Another thing that I wanted to just note is on page 5, we have in the bottom right-hand corner the customer consumption. And And I think it helps illustrate the fact that we had that decrease in water sales. So you saw that gray line, which is the most current line, dip below what we would normally see for that period. The good news is that gray line has finally converged with the other lines, which hopefully will be back on track as it relates to water sales in the future. Another thing to note is you do have your more detailed capital improvements program reporting and project management reports, where we have the capital improvement projects on the top and the backbone projects on the bottom. We are using as the projected total expenditures, we're using the numbers that we reported to the board back in February of 2019 when we reset the cost of the backbone phase 1 projects and also noted some additional funds for phase 2 for some of the initial planning. So that's a form that Julie talked about, some more detailed reporting, and so that's something I wanted to make point out and point your attention to. And then last is, if you go to the last page, you'll notice we've transitioned. We've transitioned from telling you about river flows, although it would have been really interesting before today. Today
Yeah.
the river flows finally shot up.
Right, I bet they did.
But actually, to this point, it has been an extremely dry November, and so river flows never bounced up like we were hoping. But good news is we're seeing some better river flows today. Just unfortunate, it took a while. And then, so what we're switching in the winter is Suzanne puts together information as it relates to snowpack and using the snow-tell sites. And so the challenge with this is it's very early in the season, so it's hard it tells a pretty bleak story. You see a lot of red around the state of Oregon, which is not a good thing. But obviously what happens with snowpack later on in the season is very critical to how river flows will be in the next spring and, well, summer and late fall. So I wanted to point out some of the things as far as your packet. The other thing in your packet is just a copy of the Regional Water Providers Consortium's e-newsletter. And one of the things that they note in here is the annual report. And so I think Commissioner Andrew, you have probably received a
Yes,
copy
I
of this
read
report.
it was a great report, I thought.
So we have a copy of the reports available online as well too, so if anybody's interested, but it highlights a lot of the different activities and
I was
what-
gonna tell him how impressed I was, because I thought it was very clear and concise, so myself, as a person who hasn't been involved with water all her life, could read that and totally understand what they're saying. It's not technical at all, it's just very straightforward.
I will pass that on to
readable.
Rebecca and her team, yeah.
Yeah,
They did a great job of, I agree, and
Yeah.
that was one of the big emphasis in trying to make it similar to what we try to accomplish with our financial statements and our reporting, is
Right.
try to make it so it's understandable and easy to read. The other thing is I wanted to make you aware, we've been talking about doing a customer attitude survey, and so have a copy. This will be going out with all the customer bills and also be available online this month, so that's taking place. And then the last thing in your packet that I just wanted to bring your attention to, and is some of the slides, when we're talking about the water treatment plants, facilities planning effort and so on, one of the questions from the last work session was kind of the age of the different
Right.
components of the water treatment plant. And I think both Adam and Rob and I, all of us noted that there was a slide that might be helpful for that. And so what we did is it took a few of the slides from the consultant's slide deck that they've been putting together. So the first slide is, kind of gives you some of the, this is different. So it gives you the different components of the water treatment plant, and then kind of tells you the useful life according to some of these rule of thumb type numbers. Then if you go back to the next page, as it relates to the aging facilities, one of the questions we had last meeting was when the different components were built, and so this puts the time frame and color codes it as to when the different components were adopted. And then the last piece is just pointing out the obvious, and that everything gets older whether we want to or not. I know, Commissioner French, so not to offend. But with that, we will be encountering instances where, as soon as 2034, if you go back to this, the front page, we will have components that will have been outlasting their useful life. And so, which is part of the reason we're going through the planning effort, and we'll have a lot more information to present to you. I think in either January or early February, we'll have the consultant come in and give you more details. We're getting ready for a workshop next week where we'll start rolling up our sleeves and looking at different alternatives and some rough costs associated with that we'll be talking to the board about and giving you the update. So those are the items in your packet that I wanted to make sure that you're aware of. As far as the management report, it's agenda item 4. I'm really not going to highlight a whole lot in there. It's pretty straightforward. I will point out that on the Tri-State Water Utility Council meeting, a couple things I do want to highlight. One, we spent a lot of time talking about federal legislation, the American Water Infrastructure Act of 2018, and this is the act that has a number of components to it, but one of the